this is historic. This is the first of its kind lawsuit has been filed alleging that these ultra processed foods caused multiple illnesses in a teenager. Okay, so this lawsuit was filed in December, and it was filed against, I believe, 11 different big food manufacturers, including Coca-Cola, Nestle, PepsiCo, Conagra, General Mills, Kraft, Mars, Mendeley's International, Post Holdings, Kellogg, and Kellanova. So it's filed by a person named with the last name Martinez, who's now 18, so we can share his name. He apparently developed diabetes and non-alcoholic fatty liver disease by the age of 16. And so now he wants to hold Big Food accountable for his illnesses. According to the lawsuit, the companies knew or should have known that the ultra processed foods were harmful and addictive. And it noted that this person, who was a child at the time, grew up eating heavily advertised brand name foods that are now staples of the American diet, like sugary soft drinks, Cheerios and Lucky Charms, Skittles and Snickers, frozen and packaged dinners, and and the list goes on. So basically, they're saying that these diseases didn't exist, before ultra processed foods came about. Like, they didn't exist in these high quantities, and we're seeing an unprecedented number of these illnesses, particularly among children. And the lawsuit is saying that the defendants didn't warn the public, including the children, of how harmful these foods are, and they didn't properly test them for safety. They also are saying that these big food companies marketed and targeted children with unfair and deceptive messages regarding these ultra processed foods, much like the cigarette companies did. So, and they go through in the documentation that they filed for this lawsuit, they actually go through this in terms of the playbook being very similar with big tobacco and big food in terms of getting these ultra processed foods, into our food supply. And I want to go into that, but first I do want to give you a statistic that I thought was alarming. That they're saying that 15% of teenagers have fatty liver disease. 15%, Joel. Like, when I grew up, we heard of fatty liver disease related to alcoholics.
Yeah.
And now 15% of teenagers have fatty liver disease. 38% of these teenagers are pre-diabetic, and almost 50% of them are overweight or obese. Almost half of all teenagers are either overweight or obese. That's shocking. When we were growing up, I remember there might be one child in the classroom that might be a little bit overweight, like, 5-10 pounds overweight.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, but, we call them pudgy.
Yeah. Pudgy. But 50%, and now they're having these chronic diseases show up already. This is crazy. It's crazy. So I wanted to go into a little bit next about, let's discuss how this actually happened, how big tobacco basically gave us the vast majority of these ultra processed foods that we have today. So from about 1988 to about 2001, somewhere roughly in that period of time, big tobacco ended up dominating the food industry. And they created a blueprint for ultra processed foods. And those food products still can impact our health today, because many of them that their researchers, their scientists created, are still on the market to this day. So if we go back to 1963, we had R.J. Reynolds, which was one of, the biggest tobacco companies. They made Camels and Newport cigarettes. Well, in 1963, they acquired Hawaiian Punch from Pacific Hawaiian Products Company. So they merged now with the food supply. They expanded in 1979 to purchase Del Monte, right? We think of Del Monte as providing fruit. In 1985, they merged with Nabisco, right? And we think of Nabisco with products like Chips Ahoy and Ritz and Oreos. So you can see they're it's almost like creating a monopoly, or they're consolidating the food supply, right, by gobbling up all these different companies. At the same time, we have Altria, and Altria was the parent company of Philip Morris and Marlboro cigarettes. So around the same time, Altria acquired General Foods, right? And General Foods owned Kool-Aid and Jello. So basically, you have these two of the biggest tobacco companies gobbling up all of these different food companies. In 1988, Altria acquired Kraft Food, and that brought foods into their portfolio like Tang and Capri Sun. And later that, or sometime that year, Lunchables were actually introduced by Kraft. So Lunchables were another one of these ultra processed foods that are addictive. So by 1990, you basically have these two tobacco giants, Altria and R.J. Reynolds, that were not only the largest tobacco companies in the U.S., but they were the two largest food companies in the world. Okay, so I think so. In my recollection, it starts around 1963, and by 1990, they became the two biggest. So you've got, what is that, Joel? It's not a monopoly, but when you have two big companies,
Oligarchy. It's an
oligarchy. That's the word. So like they created this oligarchy. Okay. And they didn't stop. In 2000, Altria bought Nabisco from R.J. Reynolds, right? so now they got even bigger. Now, they did start around this time period. They did start like spinning off companies to separate the association between big tobacco and big food. Okay, so like Altria in 2007 spun off Kraft Food as an independent company, distancing itself from that. But the point is, while big tobacco has divested from many of these food brands since then, the impact they had remains deeply entrenched in the food industry. They basically reshaped how food is manufactured, how it's marketed, and how it's consumed. So the biggest legacy they actually left behind was this hyper palatability of food, making it highly addictive. So one of the ways they did this is they worked with the scientists. So they used, Big Tobacco had these scientists that figured out like the exact nicotine level that would maximize addictiveness, and added flavors and textures and mouthfeel, to light up the brain's pleasure and reward centers, right? To make these cigarettes addictive. And this is well known at this point. All right. So what they did was they brought that same cigarette playbook into the processed food world. And they had some of the same researchers, in fact, who worked on nicotine addiction with cigarettes, collaborate with companies like Kraft to understand how to change these flavor profiles and manipulate the food chemicals to light up these same pleasure and reward centers to make these processed foods as addictive, in hopes of just as addictive as cigarettes. You're going to love this, Joel. Another key player, or another key part of the playbook, was hiring certain consultants. So basically, when they would come up with like a flavor, right, or some kind of chemical that was going to be added to either the cigarettes or the food, okay, so you would need to get that ingredient approved, or at least on the table, so that you can use that ingredient. So what did they do? Can you guess what loophole they used?
Oh, they used grass, generally recognized as safe, and they used consultants that were in the FDA fraternity, as RFK says, the agency capture, the revolving door, to grease the wheels of the ingredients. You're laughing like I just
You're
hit a home run.
yeah, you're brilliant. I mean, see, it is it's not even surprising anymore when you uncover like the depths of this corruption because it's the same story over and over and over again, right? So some of this, like I know in one particular case, a food safety consultant who worked as a spokesperson for the tobacco industry in the 80s, he later joined the scientific advisory board, and he was one of these top food panel experts to declare a chemical is grass. So this dual role meant he had the power to approve the chemicals for the foods and the cigarettes that the companies were making. Like it, I mean, you can't make this stuff up. Like
Yeah,
it's just
yeah,
not surprising anymore. So,
yeah.
so basically, the lawsuit is saying that these tactics that they used for big food are the same ones that they used to make the cigarettes addicting. And they did it by engineering these hyper palatable foods, which, as I said in the intro, these are the foods that have this perfect balance of added sugar, salt, and fat that make you want to crave more. And this is kind of an interesting thing because one of the biggest differences between like a natural food and these ultra processed food is that unique combination. As well as they also, like I said, add things like flavorings and stuff that light up that brain center. But if you look in nature, so you're not going to see these foods in nature, but you also don't commonly see high fat, high sugar foods together in nature. So there are some exceptions. So like cashews and pistachios, those have a lot of fat and a lot of carbohydrates, right? Durian has a lot of fat and a lot of carbohydrate. So this is a rarity. This is more of a like an anomaly that you would see in nature to have one food that has a lot of fat and a lot of carbs in it at the same time. And those are at least natural sugars, right? Those are natural carbs that are in that food. The ultra processed foods are obviously these lab derived sugars, a lot of them coming most likely from corn, GMO corn, that's treated with some kind of pesticide or herbicide. But it is, I think, as a scientist and someone who's trying to understand why these foods are so addictive, why, as a mom, I have a hard time when my children eat them, getting them to stop eating them.
Yeah.
And I think we were not designed to eat foods in this type of ratio. And that's evidenced in nature by the few examples you can find of foods being both high in fat and high in carbs at the same time. All right. And even those aren't foods that we'd be eating all the time. Cashews and pistachios, you wouldn't be walking around. Our ancient ancestors wouldn't walk around and have year-round access to cashew type and pistachio type foods.
I
Um,
was just thinking about foods that I really, really like. I mean, I'm thinking of like, well, my childhood in Venezuela, I have a lifelong addiction to bananas. I mean, that's when people ask me, what's your non-local hypocrisy? It's always bananas. We had bananas in the yard in Venezuela. I mean, mom's got pictures of the back door coming out of the house. It was always a big stack of bananas. You just grabbed one, ate it on the way. And now, we left there when I was 4, but by 4, a lot of your whatever your tastes and things are developed for life anyway. So for me it's bananas, but strawberries, man, do I love strawberries. But when I think of addiction, you know you don't just eat bananas until the whole bunch is gone. You don't eat strawberries until the whole bowl is gone. You eat a few. But man, Doritos, Lay's potato chips. I mean, you sit down with a bag, and the next thing you know, the bag is gone. I mean, it's just Ooh.
Yeah.
Fortunately, I haven't eaten a whole bag any, but man, you've got to really. It takes willpower to pace yourself on that. They have this figured out, and man, as you're explaining this, I'm just thinking, whoever this attorney is who's taking this teenager's case is he's brilliant because the tobacco company's lost. I mean,
Yes.
think about the years of jousting, that it took to finally a get a guilty verdict on the tobacco companies. And so it seems to me like just politically, the tobacco companies have a vulnerability here, a political vulnerability that they lost big time once. Nobody trusts them. And then I think when the average person finds out, oh, they're using the same labs, the same scientists, and the same protocol on food. I mean, they don't have any credibility. They just don't have any credibility. And so this is wow. Yeah. This could be earth shaking here. Friends, want to dive deeper into our thought provoking conversations? Become part of the Beyond Labels family today by joining below. For any gift amount, you'll get access to the full, uncut episodes.
Every contribution, whether big or small, keeps this podcast going.
So join us and expand your Beyond Labels experience. Thank you.